The Creature Files, presented by the Department of Mythical Wildlife, with your hosts, author Todd Calgi Gallicano, Christopher McClary at the Sightings Desk, and resident skeptic Vic Afsahi. So sit back and listen as we report the latest news and up-to-date information about the mythical creatures living among us. The Creature Files. It might just save your life.
Indeed, it might just save your life. Thanks to Chris Hatfield for that amazing introduction, as always. And welcome, everyone, to The Creature Files. I'm your host, Todd Calgi Gallicano, the author of the Sam London Adventure Series. You can learn more about the books at mythicalwildlife.com, as well as learn more about this podcast. This is the second episode of The Creature Files. And for those of you just joining us, this show is all about mythical creatures. Mythical creatures in the air, mythical creatures on land, and mythical creatures in the sea, which, as a matter of fact, will be the topic for today. But before I go any further, let me go ahead and introduce my co-hosts at the Sightings Desk, Chris McClary, and our resident skeptic, Vic Afsahi. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Hello.
Todd. Hey, Vic.
How are you? How are you guys?
We are good. So last episode, we spoke with Gail Beatty, who is a Bigfoot expert.
Indeed.
And towards the end of the show, Vic had asked about a recording, if there was a recording of Bigfoot. And Gail was nice enough to go ahead and send me a couple of actual audio recordings of the Bigfoot of sound. So there was a person that recently recorded what he believes to be Bigfoot's on his property, and we're going to go ahead and play that sound for you. I don't know how many other people have heard this, but we're going to go ahead and play it for you, and we'll get some reactions. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, that was one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play the other one. Okay, so those were two recent recordings by a gentleman who believes there's Bigfoot's on his property. What do you guys think?
I have one word: haunting. If I heard that and I were out on a hike, I would start hiking back.
And Vic, what did you think?
You know, for that first one, I felt like I should be ducking and covering under my desk because it sounded like an air raid siren. But that second one, that was definitely more of a vocalization and more haunting, as Chris said. But whether it was Bigfoot or someone just celebrating a touchdown, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, it was definitely something. I've never heard anything like that. It almost sounded like a howler monkey, but what that would be doing in upstate New York, I have no idea. Well, let's keep moving on. So one of the things that we're going to do every episode is spotlight a national park. Now, national parks play a big role in the Sam London Adventure Series, and to honor that, my background is always going to be a different national park. Now, this podcast is available on iTunes and on Google. It's in audio, but there's also a video version of the podcast that you can find on YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe to that, because you'll get a little bit more of the stuff we're looking at, as we're discussing it. But for this episode, I've changed my background. Last time it was the Redwood National Park, and this time it's another park. You guys have any idea what park it might be?
It looks like the park they film Survivor Island in.
No.
I was going to say national park in like Hawaii or something like that.
Well,
The Bermuda Triangle. Is that a national park?
No, the Bermuda Triangle is not a national park.
It should be.
Thanks for playing. So this national park is Biscayne National Park, and that's off the southern coast of Florida. And it's known for its coral reefs and the fact that it's 95% water. So it's an unusual national park in that way. It's 95% water, and it factors into the Selkie of San Francisco, which is the second book in the Sam London Adventure Series. There's a lot that happens at this particular park at Biscayne National Park. So if you're in southern Florida and you want to see a national park that's mostly water and it's got a cool lighthouse, definitely check it out. All right. So I think without further ado, we should get to the sightings desk with Chris McClary. Let me guess, McClary, somebody saw something that Vic will claim they didn't see, or that their eyes were playing tricks on them.
As a matter of fact, we do. We have another Ogopogo sighting, AKA the Loch Ness Monster of Canada. Only this time, it's on Lake Skaha near Caledon, British Columbia. Now, we just had a sighting in October last year on Lake Okanagan. So what makes this even more curious is that these two bodies of water are connected by a tributary. So what happened was Jim LaRoque, he was a local liquor store owner. He's out paddleboarding with his son. He sees a flipper and a strange wave formation across the surface of the water. Look, if you know about the Ogopogo, it's a long serpent-like body with several humps, exactly the kind of thing that would create a strange wave formation. He's estimating this thing's 120 feet long. He whips out his phone and he gets incredible footage. Take a look.
Okay, so we're looking at this footage now. We see this creature, many-humped creature on a lake. It's a very still lake, and you see, I would say, about 4 or 5 humps coming out of the water, a little bit of white caps on the water surface. There's something moving across. It's very long, yeah, on the still lake here. So
I've never seen a formation like that on top of a water surface.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, you can even see some flipper action.
It looks like a flipper right in the middle, just like he said.
Now, for those of you joining us on audio, for those of you listening, you can go to the website at mythicalwildlife.com and go to our Creature Files podcast page, and you can actually see the footage that we were watching. But it is an interesting piece of footage. Now, Vic, do you have any comment?
Yeah, looking at this, it is fairly interesting, but I'm a little skeptical, obviously. I mean, how do we know that this is all one creature for one and not some sort of pod of creatures like perhaps an alligator gar or, a collection of them, for example? So I'm going to need to see some more, maybe up close or more convincing footage.
Okay. This creature in particular, the Ogopogo, it dates back much like the Sasquatch, which we talked about in last episode, the creature that the indigenous people of that area had spotted. It was, what then became Sasquatch. In this case, we have the Okanagan Valley Indians who had a water demon spirit called Nyaptik, I believe. I don't know if I'm Nahatik of the creature. But then it sort of morphed. In 1926, there was a sighting by about 30 cars, I think, that were by this beach, Okanagan Mission Beach, I think it was. In any case, they had spotted it. And then later in 1967 or 68, a man had taken some footage of it. A man by the name of Art Folden had taken some footage in 1968. That footage had some computer analysis later, and there was some speculation that it might have been just a large log. But as Chris was saying, this is a many-humped creature. This is what they consider that kind of sea serpent. And some have suggested, now, I haven't seen a lot that says that it's longer than 100 feet. So that's kind of a new detail from this particular sighting. It had been described as being about 40 to 50 feet long. Some people believe it might be a basilosaurus, which is a sort of a primitive serpentine whale. So there's some speculation that it might be that kind of creature, which obviously hasn't been around for a very long time. So that would be an interesting development. Now, we've seen a lot of these kinds of creatures being sighted in lakes and rivers over the years. Now, the Loch Ness Monster was first spotted in the 1930s, but nowadays there are dozens of sightings of these types of creatures happening. I mean, I live in North Carolina. We have the Lake Norman monster, also known as Normie. And recently there was one even spotted in the Yangtze River in China. So is it a prehistoric beast, an eel, an alligator gar, as Vic suggested?
I can assure you it's not an alligator gar.
Really? What
not.
Makes you, why do you say that? Have you ever seen an alligator gar before?
No, but I'll put my money on Ogopogo alligator gar, that's more like a mythical creature. Ogopogo, that's got my money.
Yeah, that alligator gar. Uh, and
Right there.
alligator gars get up to, I think it's about 10 feet. I mean, these things are huge. So, but who knows? I mean, hopefully we'll find out for sure, right? So, Chris, you'll keep us up to date. You're at the sightings desk. Let us know if there's new sightings of the Ogopogo, or similar creatures. We're always open to hearing about them and looking at new footage. All right, everyone, it's time for the creature feature. And in this episode, we're covering one of the most famous creatures of all mythology, the mermaid, the half fish, half human that has sort of captivated humans throughout time in books and film and television. Mermaids are everywhere, right? So what is the true origin of this beguiling creature? Well, to answer that question, it's a little complicated. The fact is there are variations of mermaids in folklore in every part of the world. Now, in book 2 of the Sam London Adventure series, The Selkie of San Francisco, the story involves a Selkie, merfolk, and creatures known as the Finfolk from the Orkney Islands. And these are all variations of what we would consider the quintessential mermaid. One of the earliest stories of these types of creatures can be traced back to Assyria in 1000 BC and relates to the goddess Atargatis, who leapt into a lake after mistakenly killing her one true love and took the form of a fish. It is suggested that this is perhaps why the creatures are often associated with calamity. Mermaids feature prominently in Greek mythology, although the Greek variations were called naiads and nereids. Now, Pliny the Elder wrote about these creatures in his Natural History, claiming they sat upon dolphins. Similar half-fish creatures also made an appearance in Chinese mythology. Now, it would take a lot more than a few minutes to list all of the occurrences of half-fish, half-human creatures in the folklore of various cultures. So we'll just focus on the traditional mermaid for this episode. The term mermaid is derived from Middle English, circa 13th century. Mere, meaning the sea or lake, and maid, referring to a young woman. Now, Chaucer would later refer to them as mermaids. Instead of the I, used a Y, and he added an ES at the end in the Canterbury Tales in the 14th century. But also in the 13th century, there was a book written called The King's Mirror. Now, that described creatures off the coast of Greenland. And I'm going to quote it here. Like a woman as far down as her waist, long hands and soft hair, the neck and head in all respects like those of a human being. The hands seem to be long and the fingers not to be pointed, but united into a web like that on the feet of water birds. From the waist downwards, the monster resembles a fish with scales, tail, and fins. That sounds kind of like a mermaid, right? Now, according to the Department of Mythical Wildlife, mermaids do not fall under the magic of the griffin's claw, which might explain the human sightings of mermaids over the years, and there have been many. Several famous explorers swore they had seen mermaids, including Columbus, Henry Hudson, and Captain John Smith, the John Smith of Pocahontas fame. According to Smith, when he was sailing off an island in the West Indies, he saw a woman swimming with all possible grace that below the stomach, the woman gave way to a fish. Of course, there have been more contemporary sightings, some particularly intriguing, including one by a Japanese soldier in 1943 and another in 1967 in British Columbia, several in Africa, and the list goes on. And we'll post a link to the website that features several of these sightings, so you can kind of see some of them and judge for yourself. But enough with the history. Let's get to our special guest. We are very lucky to have on today someone who lives and breathes with gills all things mermaid. Abby Oliver is an underwater model from Mermaid Miracles and the best Mermaid Channel Ever.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. And, I have my first question is, when did you first become sort of fascinated with mermaids?
Yeah, I was 2 years old. So my parents took me to swimming lessons at the local pool. I grew up in Iowa, and I screamed the whole time. And then they got me private lessons as well, and I screamed the whole time. So my dad took me home and had me watch an old black and white movie called Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid. And I was fascinated by the mermaid in that movie. She's amazing. And then I went to the pool the next day and jumped in the water all by myself and swam underwater just like the mermaid did. And that was kind of what started things for me. And I was never like super obsessed with mermaids. It just kind of all clicked and happened naturally. So I did lots of different water sports, and I am a free diver. And I got into like the mermaid culture and actually like like working with mermaids and things like that back in 2012. That's when I became a professional mermaid and started doing all the modeling stuff and writing about mermaids professionally and things like that. Before that was just all kind of surfing and free diving and having fun in the water.
What are your thoughts on this idea that mermaids, were existed at some point and may still exist?
Okay, well, let's be clear. Mermaids are real. So, yeah, did they exist? Absolutely. And do they still exist? For sure.
There's been a lot of reported sightings in the past, and there have been several more contemporary ones. Are there ones that you would say, you guys, you should look at these, because these are pretty amazing?
Yeah, I think one that's really interesting to me is in Israel. They actually have a $1 million reward out for proof of a sighting of this mermaid, because so many people have seen her, and the stories keep coming in and they're hitting the news. So the local city put out a $1 million reward. So like, if you want to go try and find a mermaid, I think that's a good one, because there's like automatic $1 million in your pocket.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ones. Okay, so I have this habit of going to like small coastal villages, especially like fishing cultures and things like that. And I love to ask the local people about, have you seen a mermaid? Like, what's the local traditions with mermaids? Tell me some of the stories. And a few years ago, I was traveling through South America. I'm not going to tell you where, because this island is so small that if I told you the name, you could probably go find this girl today, and she would be 10 years old now. So she was down on the coast by herself one day, and she saw a mermaid, and they had a conversation, and the mermaid gave her a necklace and said, "Don't tell anybody." Of course she told everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that didn't work out too well for her, though. So and this is like a common theme with mermaids, is they kind of say like, let's keep it a secret. They do tend to like gift people things. But unfortunately for this little girl, she got very sick. So when I came along and someone dared to tell me this story, it was with a lot of hesitation, because the whole thing was, because she spoke out, she became very ill, and it turned into a life or death situation for her. So the person that told me this was like looking over his shoulder and like, look, like, oh, I don't know, like pausing dramatically as he's going along. But what ended up happening was they brought in all kinds of doctors to try and help this little girl, and nobody could heal her. She was so sick on her deathbed. They finally pulled shamans out of the rainforest to come over and do some traditional medicine, and they were able to save her life.
Wow.
So careful with those mermaids.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah, but I think that's an incredible story of like something that's modern day, happened very recently, turned into some very real consequences as well, but also has a lot of the same themes and things like that we've seen throughout history that are consistent with mermaid sightings.
What about this sort of idea, and we see this in mythology, of mermaids being able to come on land and walk around among us?
Yeah, I think that's really consistent throughout history as well, this idea of mermaids being able to live in the sea but also get legs and walk on land. We see this in a classic story out of England, where this woman came on land and she attended church Sunday service every single Sunday. And she ended up marrying one of the local guys, and then they both just disappeared. And the legend is that they had a family and lived in the sea together. And that church to this day in England has like a plaque, like I think it's like a wood carving made in her honor with a depiction of what she looks like. I think that's a thing with mermaids. Yeah.
One of the things that I love about mythology, and I talked about it when Gail Beatty was on about Bigfoot, was this idea that, all of these different cultures all over the world, we share, in a sense, the same sort of creatures of myth. And mermaids are, no different. So there are all different kinds of merfolk mermaids. You have Selkies, in the book 2 of the Sam London Adventure series, the Selkie of San Francisco. Selkie is a part of that story, and as well as Finfolk. But we see these kinds of creatures throughout the world in all these different cultures. What can you tell us about these other types of mer creatures?
Yeah, so I wish that we talked a little bit more about this in like everyday life. Like we typically think of a mermaid and we think of Ariel from The Little Mermaid, but that's just one cultural take on mermaids for sure. Like you have the Rusalkas from the Slavic waters. You have Maneli from, it's a Persian word. It comes from the Middle East. The Njuzu from Zimbabwe. You've got in Cameroon the Miangu, in Brazil the Yara, and all of these mermaids, you know, they tend to take on very like cultural type of appearances. Like the Brazilian Yara, they definitely look like they could be indigenous to Brazil. Like I mentioned Subanamaka earlier, she definitely looks like she's from Thailand or Cambodia. So yeah, and they all have these like very specific cultural attributes as well in their behaviors. So I think it's really, really cool to talk more about like what's going on in these different cultures, because there's so many different types of mermaids. And they have consistencies, of course, but they're also very unique across their different environments.
Yeah, sort of reflecting their particular culture. And I love this idea, this sort of shared human experience, in the sense that, you know, there are mermaids everywhere, you know, in all different shapes and sizes. So, you know, we've got a couple of questions from our listeners that I'd like to bring up. So we have Corinne in Texas, and she asks, do mermaids look different from different regions that they live in? So like, do Arctic mermaids look the same as Gulf Coast mermaids? So I guess you talked a little bit about that, but you want to add a little bit more to it.
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, like we were just saying, definitely mermaids look different. And if you think about it too, like if you're an Arctic mermaid, like you're probably not getting a lot of sun. So you might be a little more fair skinned like me. But if you're hanging out in the Caribbean, you might get a nice tan. So I think you do start to see like, you know, being a mermaid being a product of her environment, and just adapting to temperatures as well. Like, yeah, different things going on there.
Okay. And we have Valentina in North Carolina asks, what do mermaids eat? And what do you do about sharks?
Okay, so my favorite meal is sushi, for sure.
Okay.
But mermaids live in the ocean. So they're definitely eating fish, like fish eat other fish for sure. And then I love sea vegetables as well. A nice seaweed salad, fantastic. And then what about sharks? Okay, I love swimming with sharks. They're a lot of fun. And people can swim with sharks too. And sharks get a bad rap. They're really fun. Like they swim super fast, and they can be kind of like feisty and playful. I was just about a year ago, I was in the Bahamas swimming with some sharks just out in the middle of the ocean. We took a boat out there, and I dove in, and I swam with my legs this time, and I got to jump in and play. And there were two sharks down below me, and they let me drop in between them. Oh, wow. And like the three of us swam together for a while, and they had to really slow down to let me keep up. And both of them were making eye contact with me, and it was a really cool experience. Like sharks are awesome.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. So Brianne in Michigan asks, can mermaids sing underwater?
Definitely. Sound is actually how I communicate underwater. We use some hand signals, but if I need to get somebody's attention, if they're not looking at me, I will pound my fist like this. Mm-hmm. Or if there's something to tap on, I do that. You can make a clicking noise with your mouth like that, which is what dolphins do. But that all that sound carries really well underwater. So it's definitely easy to sing underwater, and that's a great form of communication.
All right. Ruby in Florence, Italy says that she saw a mermaid at the Renaissance Festival in North Carolina, but is not sure if it was a real mermaid or a human pretending to be a mermaid. Do you know?
I do know. This is my friend, actually, Mermaid Shannon. She's You can look her up on Instagram. The Mermaid Shannon is her handle, and she's a fabulous mermaid. Is she real? I mean, first of all, I don't want to live in a world where there's not mermaids. So I'm all in on this. Mermaids are a real thing. And I've never seen Shannon with legs personally. I mean, I assume she can come on land and walk like other mermaids, but as far as I know, Shannon's pretty real. And she definitely, like, her tail is beautiful, and she's underwater for quite a long time at these Renaissance festivals. She's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Mermazing, I would say.
Amazing. That's great. And does a mermaid skin get pruny in water? This is also from Ruby.
Oh, for sure. So this is functional for mermaids and for humans. So your fingers get all pruny so that you can have traction when you're underwater. It's like one of the very cool things that your human body does to adjust to being underwater, because you're meant to be in the water. So your body like knows when you go in there, and it like does all these cool little things to like make it so that you function better in the water.
That's great. So, Chris, do you have anything that you'd like to ask Abby?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do, Todd. Thank you. First of all, Abby, thanks for being here. We were talking about movies earlier, and I'm a huge movie buff. And I remember there's a little movie you may have heard of called Pirates of the Caribbean. And I remember in that movie, those mermaids, like you, were very beautiful and very friendly at first. So I guess this question is two parts. One, is that typical? And do you have another side too?
If I remember correctly in that movie, those mermaids got into a bit of a stressful situation where they needed to get out. And they did what they had to do. So I think mermaids kind of get a bad rap for, kind of like that siren personality, sinking ships, drowning sailors, things like that. And it's like, well, what's a girl to do? Yeah. I think they all have a side to their own story to tell. And it probably would go a lot different if you heard it from their mouths. I'm going to give them the doubt.
So from their perspective, there might be a reason for them to be doing what they're doing. Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely. I'll buy that.
I have heard too from other cultures that these are like creatures living in the wild. They're they're not always going to be your friend. They're going to take care of themselves. So a lot of the fishermen have this very respectful relationship with the local mermaids and sirens. And there seems to be this kind of keep your distance, stay safe, just like if you were swimming with a shark. It's like, let's have some respect and know who we're dealing with here. But then there are so many stories about these fishermen getting lost out at sea and then having the mermaids help them come back. And it, they know that there's a friendly connection there. They're part of the bigger community at large, and everybody's working together, but also have some respect.
So Abby, I have a piece of glass art that looks like you. I bought this on one of my travels, and I just saw it hanging by this local artist, and I just fell in love with it.
I think it's so cool that when you start to look for mermaids, you just see them everywhere. People think that this is a new phenomenon that they've popped up so prominently in our culture, but I'm like, where have you been? They're everywhere. If you look around, you can start to see statues and trinkets and things like that. We filmed the web series Mermaid Miracles in a small little coastal California town, and it was so easy to walk around town and find all these nods to mermaids everywhere. And I think once it's front of mind, you just start to see it. But otherwise, it's wow, they've always been there. I think it's funny too that when people aren't looking for mermaids, they just walk right by and don't notice. I've had so many situations where I'm modeling for a shoot and people just don't notice. I was in open water in the ocean out in Costa Rica, and this tour boat came by and dumped a bunch of snorkelers into the water. There's probably at least 100 people that got dumped into the water. None of them saw my tail. They were around, they were bumping into me. and they just didn't notice my tail at all. And I thought, how ironic. But we like have all this, you know, conversations about how mermaids can't be real because no one's seen them. And I have so many experiences where people just walk right by, swim right by.
I'd love to, I meant to ask this too earlier, was the sensation of swimming with a fin as opposed to swimming with feet. And what advantages do you find? Like how freeing is it to swim with a fin as opposed to human feet?
I took to it right away, and it's a very natural kind of a movement in the water. It's actually more natural to swim with a monofin using a dolphin kick motion than it is to do the traditional swimming we think of with like the American crawl on the surface of the water. Like swimming under the water, doing some free diving is what the human body is meant to do. Humans have the same breath hold as a dolphin, 6 to 7 minutes. And if you can't hold your breath that long, it's just that you think you can't. And so you start to kind of freak out in your brain and you think you need air. But as soon as you start to understand what's happening in your body, you can start to hold your breath longer and longer and longer. Like I mentioned before, you know, you get the wrinkly fingers to give you the traction underwater. Babies are born knowing how to hold their breath underwater and to swim. We have long hair on our heads so that babies can hang on and swim underwater with us. There's like as soon as you get water on your face, your heartbeat immediately slows down in your body. And that's to help you conserve oxygen so you can stay underwater longer. But swimming underwater with a monofin is just like, it just feels right, you know? Yep. I've never been great at doing the right kind of swimming, but I'm a natural freediver just like everyone else is. And I love teaching swimming lessons where I just teach people how to be in the water as opposed to like doing some kind of a specific motion, because I think once they start to understand like what happens to your body and just like relax into it, they naturally go off and swim. So it's a lot of fun.
And what about like the speed underwater? Do you see a big difference between how fast you can move?
Yes. Me and my monofin, we go really fast. And this tail in particular is very hydrodynamic, as I think all mermaids are. Mm-hmm. And I can move a lot of water with that monofin. So my fluke, we call it. And so I go super fast because I'm moving so much water. If you think about like cupping your hand as you try to like pull through the water, like this is a big fluke. So I'm moving a ton of water and I go super fast.
Which I imagine is the sensation. It'd be hard to compare, but what you would imagine flying might be like.
Yeah. Okay. So I like that because I did get to go, what do you call it? Zip lining through a jungle one time. Mm-hmm. And people were so nervous. And I was like, wow, this is so much like diving in the ocean. Like being in the trees was like being in the kelp beds. And I didn't have that like fear of height because I always start at the top when I dive down, right? So it was very similar sensation.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was, flying and diving in the water, really similar.
Cool. And what would you, what kind of advice would you give for some of our listeners who are really interested in this and would like to sort of start exploring the idea of swimming with a fin?
Okay, so first of all, find a friend. I try to never go in the water by myself. So find your mermaid pod and have everybody swim together. I love underwater tea parties. I think that's great practice for holding your breath. And you can get fabric tails to start out with that are really easy to take on and off. Some of my favorites, the Mertailer still's a great one, and the Mahina mermaid fin is fabulous. But yeah, if you want to start getting in the water, just start exploring it, but do it with your mermaid pod for sure. No swimming alone.
Now you mentioned something about a tea party. What was that? What's that exactly?
Okay, so this is something that all little girls do. So you just sink yourself underwater, okay, and you pretend like you're having tea. Okay. You serve your little cookies and you drink your tea and things like that, and it's fun because it kind of occupies your mind, so you forget how long you're actually underwater.
Mhm.
And you're just having fun and you're with your friends, and it's a blast.
Okay, great. Now, we also have with us our resident skeptic, Vic Afsahi. Vic, do you have any questions for Abby?
Absolutely. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being with us. This is a real treat and a very unique perspective that I would not have otherwise. That's for sure. A lot of these questions I think we already kind of covered, but one thing I wanted to ask you was, do you have any, because you've swum all over the world, it sounds like, and a lot of different waters and seas and what have you. Have you ever seen anything with your own eyes that you could not explain otherwise?
Yeah, whenever I am in the water, like I tend to be the mermaid. So I haven't personally seen another mermaid, but I have experienced others reacting to me. I think that's really unique. And by others, I mean not only just humans, but like all of the different beings that are in the water. So I can be in the water with a lot of other people, and then like a turtle will come right up to me and be like, "Oh, hey." I've had the experience of I was swimming off the coast of Cabo San Lucas, and I turned around and there was this whole school of fish following me. I should have these like really unique interactions with all this sea life where they're like, "Oh, hey, mermaid," and they react very differently to me than they do to everyone else that's there. It's a really surreal experience, and I think it's awesome.
So I wanted to kind of retouch on that very, very interesting story about the little girl who received a gift from the mermaid. It was a necklace, was it?
It was a necklace, yes.
What did it look like?
I did not see the necklace. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, this story was told to me very hesitantly. And the whole community had agreed not to talk about it anymore because the little girl had gotten so sick. And the whole thing was, don't tell, don't talk about it.
Right.
So, yeah, they weren't ready. They weren't rushing to show me anything.
Yeah. And as a sort of a follow-up to that, do you have any other like really interesting or at least stories that stuck out in your mind of firsthand experiences that other people have had that they've told you?
Yeah, I have so many stories. Okay, so one in particular that I really love. I have a friend who grew up in Micronesia, and he, like, mermaids, it was just understood that they were real and existed. They didn't have this like myth culture around them, and they were commonly encountered by the fishermen. And it wasn't until he left Micronesia that mermaids turned into something that weren't real. And one of the most interesting experiences he shared with me was that he was in the water with his friends one day, and a bunch of stingrays showed up, like a lot. And so it was like he was about 10 years old, and all of his friends go running out of the water screaming, like you would. And his aunt was close by, and she said, "I'll just calm down and relax." She's like, "Why would you run away and be afraid of the stingrays? Like, you are of the stingray clan." And she flipped him over on his back to float, and she started chanting. And all these stingrays came up and surrounded them, like, all nice and calm. And I thought, how amazing, how incredible is that story?
That's
like,
so cool.
People that are just like of this water culture, they tend to have like these mystical experiences that are very real, and we just don't get exposed to that when we live in city environments and modern day culture and stuff like that. But this is a man that's alive today. Like, this is from his childhood not that long ago.
Thank you, Abby. This is absolutely amazing to hear your stories. So I have one more thing I want to share, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart. And I'd be curious about your perspective on this, Abby, because now that I'm listening to your story and your take on all this, I'm having a whole new perspective on this aspect of my life, and that is this. My mother, before I was born, she used to work in a theme park in Florida called Weeki Wachee, and she was performing underwater ballet, but they were known as mermaids. Weeki Wachee was a place where you could go see mermaids. And when long after she had quit working there, I remember we took a family vacation and she took us there to show us where she used to work. And I remember seeing real live mermaid performances in this theater that had this giant screen that was basically glass on the other side of a lagoon. And that's where she used to work. But now that I'm hearing this, I'm almost wondering, maybe it wasn't really just a job.
Chris, do you think it's possible your mother is a real mermaid? Because it sounds pretty likely to me. I mean, if she was under there, like under the water performing like that, that is exactly what a mermaid does, right? There's lots of stories about like mermaids falling in love with a guy on land. And unlike the woman in England, not taking the man into the sea, but like giving up her sea life and staying and making a family on land. So I think it's definitely possible. We watch really cool too, because that's where they filmed Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid, the movie that I saw when I was 2 and got into mermaiding then.
That's crazy. You know what? That is amazing. That comes full circle. I'm going to be seeing my mom next week for Christmas, and I am going to have a very interesting conversation with her. Thank you.
I love it. You know, I have some family history myself. So there is a mermaid that's really prominent in our culture right now because she is featured as the logo on Starbucks. And that is actually my like great grandmother. Her name was Melusine Luzenian. She's from France. And she has her own mermaid story about marrying a man on land and having a lot of kids and living in a big castle. And then like her husband one day saw her turn into a mermaid. He didn't know she was a mermaid. And then she was like exposed and she jumped into the river to swim away. And the whole town ended up seeing her. And so now there are all these depictions and classic art of Melusine, and she looks a lot like me. But yeah, that's my ancestor.
That is so cool. So before we let you go, Abby, we would love to know, so how can people learn more about you, learn more about mermaids in general, becoming a mermaid, living as a mermaid, all these kinds of things? What can you tell us?
I've got a lot of underwater videos of me swimming on the best Mermaid Channel Ever on YouTube. It features a lot of my mermaid friends too. So you kind of get to see a lot of different types of mermaids like we were talking about. And if you want to learn more about working with me as a writer and consultant or hiring me as an underwater model, you can find me at indigochildren.com/mermaid.
Great. Thank you so much once again for coming on and taking the time to tell us all about mermaids. This has been incredible. We really appreciate it. Guys, do you want to say anything else?
You've changed my life.
This has been a very, very cool experience. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You guys, thank you so much for having me. You are all fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I love that. Thanks so much. Talk to you later, Abby. All right, guys, you've heard from Abby. You've read a little bit about the reported sightings. I want to go to you and get your final thoughts. But first, I just want to say that Abby got me hook, line, and sinker. I think this has been a great interview to talk about mermaids and really bring them to life and to what they're all about. Get all our questions answered. What do you guys think? Chris?
I think I'm in love. What more can I say?
Vic, our resident skeptic, what have you to say?
Well, obviously, we were a little light on firsthand experiences of sighting other, mer people. But when you take her viewpoints in totality and all the experiences that she's had, and more importantly, all the experiences that others have shared with her, it's undeniable that there is some sort of global phenomenon. And I think when you ever have people around the world that have a shared experience, it obviously lends more credence that there really is something to it. And I do hope that we get some mer footage someday. Yes,
and we'll keep our eyes and ears open for anything that might surface. I'm sure it'll come up at the sightings desk with Chris at some point, and if it does, we'll definitely cover it. We want to thank you all for joining us today on the second episode of The Creature Files. And if you're interested in mermaids, you can read about them in the second book in the Sam Lennon Adventure series, The Selkie of San Francisco. Now, we invite you to visit our website, mythicalwildlife.com, and go to the Creature Files podcast page where you can read story notes about the show. You can see some of the footage that we talked about and read some of the articles. You can also vote in our online poll, and you can report a sighting. If you've had a sighting of a mythical creature, you can report it on our website and let us know, and maybe we'll have you on the show to talk about it. You can also visit us on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter. And please subscribe to the show on iTunes and on YouTube and on Google, wherever you want to hear it or watch it. You can do that. And if you want to just send us an email, we're also available at info@mythicalwildlife.com. Thanks again, everyone. And always remember to heed your call to
Adventure.
The Creature Files. It might just save your life.